Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Mary Matte. Thanks for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. This week, we'll be speaking to Jasper Nathaniel, returning guest. He is just back from a reporting trip to the occupied West Bank, where he documented and showed the world a brutal Israeli settler attack in which a settler clubbed a Palestinian woman, elderly Palestinian woman, left her with serious brain injuries. And because of Jasper's intrepid reporting, this became a global story and has even led to some stalwart supporters of Israel having to pretend to be critical and bringing renewed attention on the overlooked constant Israeli terror of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. So Jasper joins us to discuss that and a whole lot more. And then this weekend, we'll be bringing you an interview that, Katie, you did with economist Richard Wolff about the shutdown and the victory of Zohran Mamdani in New York City.
Always great to talk to Richard Wolff. So insightful and has great things to say about the economy and Zohran Mamdani. So definitely tune in for that.
All right. The big news of this week is the government reopening after a prolonged shutdown fight. But what that also meant is that Republicans had to swear in Congressmember Adelita Grijalva of Arizona, who they had refused to seat for a very, very long time. And what seems to be the main reason why they refused to seat her is that, she would be the deciding vote in the release of the so-called Epstein files. And so Mike Johnson, doing his best to protect Donald Trump and whoever else might be implicated in these files, refused to seat her. But now she's finally in there. And we've gotten some documents released that show that there was a very cozy relationship between Trump and Epstein, or more evidence of that. But according to Trump supporter and far-right influencer Laura Loomer, we're all missing the real story. Isn't that right, Katie?
Thank God that we have Laura Loomer to draw our attention to what really matters, because the whole worldwide, sex trafficking, pedophilia, Mossad-linked billionaire scandal is really nothing compared to a much larger scandal. Let's take a look at her tweet. You can't be outraged by the Epstein saga and simultaneously not be outraged by the fact that we have Muslims serving in Congress. Their prophet was an infamous pedophile. Nobody wants to talk about that. So the real scandal is that, according to Loomer, Muhammad was a pedophile, which is not true. But even if it were true, I think people would still be right to be more upset about Epstein than a religious prophet.
It takes a real Islamophobe to take a story about a Jewish billionaire with heavy ties to Israel and the current president into a story promoting Islamophobia, which is what Loomer does. That's really what she excels at. And so, 10 out of 10 there. No notes.
Yeah, no notes. Yeah. I mean, it really is amazing. So she goes from, if you think this pedophile is bad, let me mention someone else who's a pedophile, but not a pedophile. And then let me connect that pedophile to someone who shares the faith of that prophet and serves in Congress. That's the real threat.
We are excited to share with you this week's sponsor, Venice AI. ChatGPT has the former director of the NSA sitting on its board. Edward Snowden called this a willful, calculated betrayal of the rights of every person on Earth. Just think about all the private things you've typed into ChatGPT, late night questions, business ideas, even sensitive personal struggles. How would it feel if those conversations weren't private? That's where Venice AI comes in. I use Venice to run leading open source AI models directly in my browser. My conversations are encrypted and stored only on my device, so no corporation or government can spy on me, censor me, or use my data for profit. Using AI can help with content creation, information retrieval, personal assistance, coding, and so much more. But we shouldn't have to risk our privacy to use it. If you want to use AI without handing your most personal information to corporations or the government, check out Venice.ai. Get 20% off a pro plan at Venice.ai/useful with code USEFUL.
All right. Well, for more on the week's news, check out our new segment, the Friday Free for All, except it's paywalled, which you can get at usefulidiotspodcast.com. For our free subscribers, here's a preview. We've just gone through this prolonged government shutdown because Donald Trump and the Republicans refused to extend subsidies for Obamacare, helping about 20 million people pay for the high costs of health insurance in this country. As we know, Democrats caved rather than get even a 1-year extension of the Obamacare subsidies. All they got was a promise for a vote on the subsidies. And of course, we know that Republicans don't support the subsidies because they don't support the idea of helping people who need help. So what is Donald Trump's big plan? How is he going to save the debacle of healthcare in this country? Well, he's been talking a lot about it, and here he is.
Their stock prices have gone up by 1,000% in many cases, 1,000% over a short period of time, because our country stupidly pays them so much money with this Obamacare scandal. So I want the money to go directly to you, the people. And you'll go out and you'll buy your own health insurance and you'll negotiate different plans and you'll get much better insurance and you will be an entrepreneur for yourself.
Okay, so Trump, in the first half of that clip, was railing against the insurance companies, how they make all this money off of healthcare, how their stock prices have gone up, ripping people off, right? And he's blaming Obamacare for that because Obamacare is a subsidy for the healthcare industry. So what is his big solution? The government's going to give people, individuals, money, and then they can go out and buy healthcare from the exact same companies that he says are ripping people off. And you're somehow going to somehow an individual is going to negotiate with United Healthcare and Aetna and get a better deal for themselves.
Yeah, it's insane. It's like he's just going to make it more of a gouging industry, right? Like without government intervention and negotiations, the insurance companies are now freed to raise prices even further.
It's like, what does he expect would happen? Like someone's going to call up United and be like, hey, I have this amount of money from the government. Can you give me this plan, which doesn't cover me at all? And they'll be like, yeah, no.
It's so ridiculous.
And so like he thinks people like our company's going to imagine the logistics of this. Like every company's going to negotiate with millions of people. And they'll be like, well, we love to have your business, so here's our price. It just absolutely does. He is hitting on one concept, which is that if companies are forced to negotiate, then yes, there is some leverage for the people. But how do you force the companies to negotiate? Only if you harness the leverage of a collective, which means collective investment in healthcare, which basically means Medicare for all. That if the government is covering everybody, then companies actually are forced to negotiate because you have the bargaining power of the collective. Giving it to one person individually makes absolutely no sense. He talks about being an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur for what? To get healthcare that you can't afford that doesn't even cover all of your needs.
Yeah, he's basically unwittingly making the case for Medicare for all. So, yeah, Bernie did it directly. Trump's doing it indirectly. And, it's not surprising, but there are a lot of appointees and people in Trump's administration who have major ties to the healthcare industry. So there's Kim Brandt, Trump's appointee to deputy administrator and chief operating officer at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. She worked for 4 years as a healthcare lobbyist before landing this new role. Rebecca Armstrong has also worked as an insurance lobbyist for the Insurance Industry Trade Association, America's Health Insurance Plan. And Dr. Mehmet Oz, of course, has extensive ties to the medical insurance industry, too. So depressing and makes sense, yeah. But he's good. Honestly, he says it with so much confidence that he's going to be tricking a lot of people. That's what's so disturbing. They're going to hear him complain about insurance companies being greedy, and then they're going to hear he has a plan for it, and then they're going to think, oh, good, this is going to help me.
Well, and that's all they can say is we have all these plans. We have all these ideas. So here, for example, is House Speaker Mike Johnson. And to hear more of our recap of the wackiest clips of the week, including John Fetterman sitting down with fellow pro-Israel activist Barry Weiss and the leader of Syria, who was formerly the leader of Al-Qaeda in Syria, visiting the White House, and Trump making what J.D. Vance thinks is the funniest joke he's ever heard during that visit. Go to our website, usefulidiots.podcast.com. For this week's guest, we have returning to the show Jasper Nathaniel. He is an independent reporter focusing on the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, where he's just come back from. While he was there, he caught a terror attack on camera, an Israeli settler clubbing and seriously wounding an elderly Palestinian woman. And the whole world was shown this footage because this became a viral story. So Jasper is with us once again to talk about his reporting trip and the overall context of the overlooked Israeli occupation of the West Bank. And for more of Jasper's reporting, his website is infinitejazz.com. Here's our interview with Jasper Nathaniel.
Welcome back to the show, Jasper Nathaniel.
Good to be back.
So since we last spoke to you, you had some very dramatic documentation of violence against people in the West Bank and yourself being chased. And we're going to get into that. But I want to start off by asking you more generally how what is happening in the West Bank currently puts the so-called ceasefire into perspective. I mean, there hasn't really been a ceasefire in Gaza, but what kind of violence has there been in the West Bank?
It's spiraling out of control. I mean, you know, it's been bad in the West. Well, it's been bad since 1967, but it's been especially bad in the last 3 years. It started when Smotrich basically installed himself as the governor of the West Bank in early 2023. It got worse after October 7th when the settlers and the settlers in the state realized that nobody was paying attention to them, and everything got worse. And it's hard to say if it is the ceasefire in Gaza that led to this latest spike or if it is the olive harvest. It's probably some combination of the two. But I think I read that there were 8 reported attacks a day during the month of October, and that only includes what's reported. And, it's probably obvious that a lot of Palestinians are not reporting this stuff because, reporting would mean going to the Israeli authorities. So, I'm still struggling to find the right words to describe what it feels like on the ground in the West Bank right now. But out in the olive fields, I mean, it's just terror. Every single time you go out there, you're facing attacks from masked, armed, dangerous people who know that there's a very, very, very small, minute chance that they'll ever be held accountable. So it's just, I don't know what to say about how it, with respect to the Gaza ceasefire. I mean, funny enough, in an earlier draft of the, quote, Trump peace plan, there was something about the West Bank, and then it got crossed off in the final draft, which I think was probably one of the demands that, Smotrich made in order to not sabotage the whole thing. So yeah, it's just a complete catastrophe. And, what is so annoying, frankly, is how it's talked about like it's just a totally unrelated thing. It's like, well, there's quiet in Gaza now. In the West Bank, it's bad. Like it's the same war, or it's the same genocide, I should say. It's the same Israeli military killing people. The settlers in the West Bank are the same. Some of them are the same settlers in the government who are also, making policy decisions in Gaza. So it's just like it's a farce, basically.
This West Bank violence has actually been somewhat covered. I mean, some people are paying attention to it in large part, I think, because of your recent reporting. But on Wednesday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was actually asked about the violence in the West Bank. Let's take a listen.
There's some concern about events in the West Bank spilling over and creating an effect that could undermine what we're doing in Gaza. We don't expect it to. We'll do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen. I think you're just talking about the violence part. But I thought today the comments were very strong by the president of Israel and also by the IDF commander in the area. His own troops were attacked. As well as police officers. So I thought the Israelis today responded, and they actually sent forces to respond to the attacks today as well, which is why their forces came under attack by some of these elements.
He's referring to an incident in which, I guess, dozens of settlers stormed a Palestinian village with weapons, set a fire at farmland vehicles and buildings, and this led to 4 arrests out of the dozens involved. So what is your response to Rubio's comments here?
It's really hard to watch him and listen to him is my first response. He's just, I mean, he couldn't have, made my point better. Like what he said is there's a chance of this spilling over into Gaza and harming our deal, as if it's not a problem in itself. It's only a problem if it interferes with, this precious peace plan. Go talk to the 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and see if it's a problem for them, or only if it, spills into Gaza. It really, it's actually like perfectly sort of reminiscent of the way the West Bank is covered by the mainstream media, which is like, even in like the refugee camps in the north that have been completely flattened by the Israeli military, they sometimes say it's been Gazified. Like it's always sort of derivative of what is happening in Gaza. He kept saying like, I heard about what happened, or they responded to what happened, because like, yeah, it's, Israel responds as soon as the settlers turn on the IDF soldiers, which happens from time to time. That's when it becomes a real issue for them. And, what he's not saying, which he obviously knows, is that the state is in lockstep with a lot of these violent settlers. There are some factions in the Israeli security apparatus, which are, in fact, I think basically these violent settlers are a headache for them, and they I think would like to contain them, but just at the highest levels of the government in Israel, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, they're the ones arming and funding and supporting these violent settlers. So it's always treated like it's just this little sort of problem off on its own that needs to be dealt with. The other thing is, I this morning I was reading the Israeli papers and seeing like the violence has now reached the level where Israeli authorities are having to respond to it, and they all use similar language, fringe settler youth. A lot of these guys are full-grown men. They're not youth. Some of them are youth. A lot of them are not. They're not fringe. They're pretty mainstream at this point. And they also will use this phrase of like, they can't be out there, seeking vigilante justice. In other words, like, it's the state that's allowed to kill them, not you guys. This is vigilantism. It's completely reflective of the way the mainstream media, the Israeli state, certainly the U.S. security establishment, talks about settler violence when it becomes an optics problem, which is as if it's a fringe group of radical children who are causing trouble, if not doing the state's bidding on their own.
So you recently had this harrowing experience that went viral around the world. You were in the West Bank with a group of olive farmers. The Israeli military basically leads you into a settler ambush, and in which you have to flee. And during this, you capture on camera an image that went around the world: a settler beating an elderly Palestinian woman with a club, leaving her with serious brain injuries. I know you've talked about this a lot, but briefly catch us up on what happened and what's been the fallout since.
So what happened was I was in this town called Termisaya, which is it's an interesting place because it's a largely Palestinian American town. Like 80 to 90% of the population is American citizens, and they have money, and they have not really been subjected to too much occupation violence in their lives. Only in the last really 2 to 3 years have they been under attack, and that reflects the emboldened settlers who are basically setting their sights higher. So what's happened around Termisaya is that in the olive fields that belong to the Palestinians, it's private Palestinian land. It's also in Area B, which means that that the Palestinians have full administrative control over it as well. The olive field serve as sort of a buffer between the village of Termisaya and the big settlement there, which is called Shiloh. And in the last 2 years, settlers have been peeling off from Shiloh and building outposts, or basically little settlements that are illegal, even under Israeli law, building outposts in the olive fields. They've been actually occupying Palestinian farmhouses and structures there, and they've basically taken over the olive fields. And so it's been impossible for the Palestinian farmers there to get to their land. And this is land that has been with their families for generations. I mean, literally their great grandparents were harvesting the same olive trees that they should be harvesting today. And so because of this new dangerous situation, all the farmers in the town decided to go out together on one day in one caravan for protection. And in the first 3 minutes of our drive out into the olive fields. It was a caravan of maybe like 10 or 15 cars, like maybe 40 or 50 Palestinian farmers and their workers. In the first 2 to 3 minutes, we encounter a settler with a gun who's waving his pistol around, blocking us, and just menacing us. And I later learned, he is the leader of the local outpost. This guy has like a huge shaggy beard. He's certainly not a youth. He's probably in his 40s, if not his 50s. And he's long been known to the Israeli authorities. I mean, he's a violent man who has, I believe, I was told, a police officer in Israel told me that he shot somebody before. So anyway, we saw him and he was talking on his cell phone. And so we recognized, okay, they know we're here and he's probably putting the word out. And this was not a surprise. Like, we knew that they would see us coming and we expected there to be some confrontations. But then we basically drive a different way. We get into the olive fields. And then when we're trying to get out, we become trapped because we're being blocked by settlers on one side. And then on the other side, there's an army Jeep just in the middle of the road blocking us. And so me and the farmer that I was with, Yasser, decide that the safest bet would be for me to get out of the car and walk up to the soldiers and try to talk to them and basically try to talk them into escorting us out of the olive fields. It pains me to have to do this, to have to go, plead for help from soldiers, but the alternative was getting lynched by settlers. So I go do that. I walk towards the soldiers with my hands up and, they aim their weapons at me, which is just it's just their sort of, how they talk to you in the West Bank. It's their mode of communication. And I tell them, we're trapped by settlers. We need help getting out. We're just trying to get back to the village. I tell them that I'm American and they sort of question me. And then they say, okay, fine, get in the car and we'll help you get out. So I get back in the car. We drive up. We see right next to the army Jeep, there is the same settler with the gun and the beard. His name is Amishav Maltz. And he's just standing there next to his ATV. And then on the other side of the army Jeep is a Palestinian car that has been damaged. So the windshield is smashed and its tires are slashed. So we realize, okay, there's already been an attack. So I say to the soldiers again, are you going to help us get out? Are you going to move the settlers? And they say, yes, we're going to move them and then you can go. And then the soldiers get in the Jeep and speed away, leave us in the dust with the violent settler. And the other Palestinian car that had already been damaged. So we're thinking, okay, those guys just left us out to dry after, promising us safe passage. But the settler with the beard sort of drives away on his ATV and we think maybe we're in the clear. So I get out of the car to help push the damaged car because I wanted to help them get to the ridge of the hill so they could basically roll back down into the village. And as I'm doing that is when, this is about 4 or 5 minutes after the soldiers drove away, this huge mob of dozens, if not hundreds of settlers wearing masks, carrying clubs, throwing huge stones appear from over the ridge of the hill and start chasing me. So that's when I run for my life. I get down to the bottom of the hill. I get into a car and one of the settlers clubs through our rear windshields. We're thinking at this point, and we were trapped because there's a line of cars now trying to get out of the olive fields. And there's this huge mob that is now like smashing up cars, setting cars on fire. And then the guy clubs through our windshield. In that moment, both of us thought, and when I was running too, both of us thought, this could be it. We're in serious trouble. And, these settlers, they kill people. They beat people to death. In fact, just a couple kilometers away, they beat a Palestinian American kid to death, Saifullah Musalet, in July. And I had just been in Washington, D.C. with his family reporting on that. So I knew these guys are not messing around. And then this one guy with the club basically runs around the car, and that's when he spots this older woman standing by herself under an olive tree. He runs straight at her, strikes her in the head, knocks her out cold. I watched her whole body go limp. She hit the ground. He stood over her and struck her twice more in the head with this club. And, I'm saying club, but it's a weapon. This thing was clearly fashioned into a weapon. And then, the mob of settlers kept coming, throwing rocks, beating cars. A couple activists got beaten. I got out of the car to try to help get the woman to safety, and me and two Palestinian guys got her into another car that were able to get away with her. And it was just pure chaos. I do want to emphasize that, like, I don't have a smoking gun that proves that the army knew this ambush was about to happen. What I do know for a fact is that they knew they were leaving us with the violent settler that we had just asked for safe passage from. The mob of settlers showed up about 5 minutes after they left, and then it was a war scene, basically. I mean, there were literally cars exploding, there were people screaming, there was a Palestinian fire truck, so there was a siren, and they never showed up again. So, in the most generous reading of it, they knew that we were being attacked, and they did not come to help us, which they then, completely lied about the next day when they told all the Israeli papers that they had dispersed the confrontation, which just did not happen. That's the basics of the attack itself. I can get into the aftermath, but yeah.
In terms of the aftermath, talk to us about your own government's response. You contacted the U.S. Embassy. What have your elected representatives, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Schumer, what have they told you? Ever
they
since?
immediately sent out the Marines to rescue me from the fields and put me on a private plane back to. No, I mean they did nothing. I mean, I actually did speak to two people at the U.S. Embassy who I was able to get in touch with, and they saw the video and they both expressed horror and sympathy and fear. And then when I told them we need protection, by the way, again, like, I'm surrounded by Americans. I might be the only white one, but there's lots of Americans here who you are, who are represented by you ostensibly. They literally say, one guy says to me, unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to protect you. It is the responsibility of the host government, meaning Israel, to protect you. And then I point out, I say, it was the host military that led us into this ambush. And he says, well, in the instances where the host government can't protect you, we pull our embassy. So then I said, and then he references like Venezuela and Syria and a couple other countries. So I say, okay, so are you pulling the embassy from Israel? And then he connected me with public affairs, and then I didn't hear from them again. So the U.S. Embassy told me flat out, and I shared the text messages, we cannot protect you. My representative, Chuck Schumer, Brand, completely ignored me. I posted a video directly asking them for help. It got over 1 million views on Twitter. Anybody who knows anything about staffers, like, they obviously saw this video. It was shared by like huge names in Washington, viewed over 1 million times. They all saw it and they didn't do anything. My mom, who is a classic New York Jewish liberal, who's voted for Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand more times than she can remember, called their offices every single day for 2 weeks. And she was able to speak to one person in Chuck Schumer's office who told her that they were going to have an emergency meeting with the senator to discuss it and then would be back in touch. And then she never heard back. So yeah, they've all just completely ignored me, basically. And it's interesting though, because it's like, on the one hand, you think, well, they obviously don't care about Palestinian lives. None of those three have showed any, meaningful sympathy for the carnage in Gaza or the West Bank. But it's actually, I think a lot of it is just pure deference to Israel, because I'm a New York Jew. Like, I'm Chuck Schumer's guy. I'm his constituent. And
they're supposed to care so much about Jewish safety.
Exactly. And, they just expressed, they didn't express anything. They ignored me. So it was, all of it is like, none of it is surprising. We know they're in the bag with AIPAC. We know that they are, incapable of criticizing Israel, but to actually just experience it firsthand in a moment when I was actually in physical danger it still felt shocking to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's described so much of what Israel does and what our government does in its lockstep with Israel. Is it's not surprising, it's kind of predictable, and yet it's still shocking. I mean, it's just still remarkable. Can you talk about the outcome of your reporting on this and what effect it had on the people living there?
It was pretty wild what happened. I mean, basically, like, that day, October 19th, I was like in the olive fields for hours, and what happened is I had sent the video to one of the activists on the ground because they needed it for documentation since one of their people was beaten, and then it made its way around the internet before I even checked my phone again. Because I texted somebody and I said, like, I want to speak to the family of the woman who's injured and make sure she's okay with it before I share it. And then he was like, buddy, have you been on Twitter? And it was just everywhere already. And so at a certain point, a couple hours later, I started to realize, and people started to tell me, like, this might be one of those rare instances where something so heinous is caught or documented that Israel, they can't spin it. There's no way to spin it. And B, like, they might have to issue some sort of a response. And I'm thinking of like when they bombed the World Food Kitchen truck in Gaza, and it was just like there was a picture of like the van that said World Food Kitchen with like a hole from a missile in it. And I think that was one of the few instances where they like issued their apology because, you know, the celebrity chef was involved. And so I realized like this might be one of those instances. And sure enough, the next morning there was a story in Times of Israel where the chief of police in the West Bank, who is a Ben Gvir acolyte, I mean, this guy is a far-right nut job. He had shared my video in a group chat with police officers and said something like, you know, this video kept me up at night. We must not be cruel like our enemies. We must arrest him and demand justice, which I think it's pretty clear he knew he meant it for it to be leaked to, you know, make some kind of a statement. And so what happened was the next day I was back in the olive fields and there were Israeli soldiers there patrolling, protecting the Palestinians. And it was clear to me and to all the Palestinians that I talked to that, you know, they didn't suddenly grow a conscience and, you know, decide they wanted to protect these people. They understood that they had a PR disaster on their hands and they had to save face by preventing another attack and by showing that they cared in some way. The other thing that happened on that day, though, which I did not learn until later, was that the Israeli police who were there doing an investigation were hanging out with Amishav Maltz, the leader of the local outpost who had menaced us with the gun, who the soldiers had left us behind with. So, you know, try to imagine like if there's a mafia hit or a mafia attack somewhere, and then the police come the next day to investigate it and they're with the mob boss. He's just at the scene. I mean, it's like it couldn't be more obvious what that means. And the fact that they weren't afraid to do that is just kind of shocking. But nonetheless, I mean, there were a couple of peaceful days in the olive fields there. And what it showed me, in my opinion, was Israel, as much as it seems like they are, you know, completely shameless and immune to global outrage, like on some level, they are still responsive to, or they have to still be responsive to international pressure when it reaches a certain point or when it is, you know, in a certain nature. And in the case of a masked settler clubbing an old woman that's on video, like I said, you know, that it's unspinnable. And so, after that, I mean, I was contacted by an Israeli security agency, like one of the really scary ones. It scared the shit out of me when I got the call. Just from picking it up, I was like, okay, well, now they have my phone hacked for the rest of my life. And my instinct was I shouldn't talk to these people. But then I was at a community meeting in Messiah, and unanimously everybody was like, you actually do need to speak with them, not only because we need documentation, but because we're in acute danger and anything that might potentially help us. And, you know, as I've written before, like, you guys both know this, but there are elements in Israeli security agencies that will actually go after these violent settlers. Not in my perspective, it's not because they're like against the project of ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. It's more because like they want to do it the orderly way with settlement building and, you know, ways that are much cleaner. So anyway, I talked to the community. I talked to a bunch of Palestinian lawyers and to some human rights lawyers in Israel, and they all said you should talk to them. And so I did. I spoke to them, and, you know, they had obviously seen the videos already. And what I came away thinking was they're going to find the guy who clubbed her. And they're going to arrest him. And I don't know if he'll do any real jail time. He might, but that is their token arrest to show that they did something. If they actually wanted to stop the violence in Termessiah, let alone the rest of the West Bank, there's a very simple way to do it. They know exactly where these violent settlers are staying. Like, their outposts are right there. You can walk up to them. You'll get killed if you're, a Palestinian or a journalist maybe, but they're right there. They know who the leader is. They know where they're getting their money and their weapons. Like, they could dismantle this if they wanted to, and I've seen no indication that they will. So listen, like, they arrested the guy on Sunday actually, and I'm glad to see it, just because it's one dangerous settler now, out of the olive fields for now, and maybe it will put a chill through some others. But I've seen, again, like, it's nice that the Israeli authorities have to acknowledge that a bad thing happened, but they're treating it the way, like the bad apple thing. There's a bad apple and we've arrested him and now everything's fine is sort of my impression.
Now, given the kind of effect that this has had on, to some extent, I mean, I spoke to some of the people in that village, or people who aren't there currently, but have family there. And they said how it really did offer some protection. Like, they were able to do some harvesting, as superficial and temporary as it is. But it made me think, I mean, imagine if more media were covering this. Imagine how much of an impact it could have on the behavior of the settlers and the soldiers. And again, I want to be clear, it's not because Israel would stop this terrorist project, but it could have some effect of providing some safety for Palestinians. Again, it wouldn't stop the evictions, right? But maybe not these violent attacks. So I think it really is another example of how our media silence is complicit.
It might even stop some of the evictions. I mean, like, there's a feeling on the ground when you talk to people that, like, nobody knows how to stop the momentum that the settler movement or I should say, nobody knows how to, like, move things the other way. Like, Israel is moving to the right. The government is, run by right-wing fanatics who are hell-bent on ethnically cleansing the whole West Bank. But it could not be more clear. And, case in point is what happened after that video went viral, that the only thing that will slow them down is more eyeballs on them. And that's why the activists there are just doing what's called protective presence. It's literally their job to stand there in these villages, in the olive fields. And when the settlers come, if they see them, they see, oh, there's white people here, or, Hebrew-speaking Israelis who are, anti-occupation, anti-Zionist, like, they might be less likely to do something. And furthermore, if there's a camera in their face, they might think twice about, attacking somebody. And so, I mean, to answer your question, Katie, like, yes, like, that is the only thing that will stop this. And also, like, why do we think they don't want journalists in Gaza? I mean, obviously because they're free to commit atrocities with only Palestinians filming it who are not taken as seriously and who they can just kill one by one. But when you get Western journalists in there, it's undeniable. And it's actually, I'm not a media critic, and I listen to and sometimes take part in the criticism of the mainstream media, and it's all very legitimate. But it's not my lane. But this is just totally shameful that there are not huge media crews from every network, from every major newspaper in the West Bank. It is, a historic land theft, historic levels of state violence. And I'm like, people are shocked to see me, an independent journalist, there because they're just not used to it. Like, there's Jerusalem bureaus for all these major papers and networks, and they will, like, send somebody out in the wake of an attack to, like, film something and talk about a fringe settler attack. But in terms of, like, actually really documenting on a deep, meaningful level what's happening and who's behind it, it's just not happening. And it's really shameful.
Just this week, Israeli settlers have attacked an industrial zone near Nablus, like, they burned vehicles. There also was a mosque that was attacked in an arson attack in the northern West Bank. Not clear who did it, but it's obviously settlers, just based on everything we know about how they behave. And I'm just curious, when it comes to the displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank, which is overlooked because of the number of displaced Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, what is the scale of displacements of Palestinians from Israeli attacks, whether it's settlers or soldiers? And where do people go when their homes are destroyed or stolen from them by the Israelis?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in the north, in the refugee camps that have been, completely flattened, like entire neighborhoods flattened, I think over 40,000 people have been displaced, and there's no sign of when they'll be able to go back home and try to rebuild. I spent some time in Tulkarem, which is one of these refugee camps, and I asked the same question, like, where are people going? And the answer is like wherever they can. So the ones who can afford to move into the city and get an apartment do that, but a lot of them can't. So I went to a school where 130 Palestinians, like 15 or 20 families, are living, people who were already refugees living in a refugee camp and now are refugees from the destroyed refugee camp. And they are living in classrooms. Each family has a classroom. There's 2 bathrooms for 130 people. And it's horrific living conditions. And I met a family who had a newborn baby there. It was actually very beautiful because the neighbors had decorated their classroom while they were out with It's a Boy balloons and things like that. But I mean, they're living in despair, and it's really just not getting covered at all. In places like these Bedouin communities in the south and in like the Jordan Valley, Masriyata, the big one that hopefully some people are paying attention to right now, is called El Khair. It's where there was a pretty high profile murder in July where an activist, Auda Hathaleen, was murdered by a notorious settler named Yinan Levy. They are being chased off their land as we speak. Literally, right before I got on, I got a voice note from a friend there who said settlers are back attacking them. They're desecrating their graves, and they have final demolition orders from the military and are potentially facing demolitions of almost every remaining structure in this little village. They don't there's a reason the documentary was called No Other Land. Like, they don't know where they're going to go. They don't have money. They might go and try to live in some of these other communities in Masriyata, but those ones are going to be next to be demolished. So I really don't know where people are going to go and where they're going. And I have not been able to get a good answer from anyone, because I think the answer is like, some people who can afford to get new places will, but a lot of them are basically going to be homeless and are going to have to try to just figure out where to go with no clear answers.
Speaking of the effects of this on Palestinian Americans, can you tell us about Mohammed Ibrahim?
Yeah, Mohammed Ibrahim is he's 16 years old. His family has a home in Florida, and he spent a lot of time in Florida. What a lot of these Palestinian American families do is basically like they will own a business in the U.S. There are these like real sort of Palestinian American communities in Florida and California and in New Jersey and various places, and then they bring their families back to these villages to go to school there and to just help them sort of like connect with their roots. So this is a family, the Ibrahim family. They live in a village called Al Mazra Al Sharqiya. It's the same village where Saifullah Musalet was from. He's the 20-year-old who was beaten to death by settlers. Saifullah is Muhammad's first cousin. So literally their moms are sisters. Their grandma is the same person who I met, and she introduced herself by saying, my one grandson was beaten to death. My other one is in prison. And basically what happened was
And he's 16.
He's 16. He was 15 in February when soldiers, 30 soldiers stormed into his home at 3 a.m. They didn't tell the family what they were doing. Of course they had their guns drawn. They went into his bedroom, blindfolded him, bound his hands and his legs, and put him in a military jeep and drove away. The family didn't know where he was for several days. They had taken him to Ofer, which is one of the Israeli military detention centers. And according to his affidavit, Mohammed's affidavit, he was beaten in the car on the way there. He was beaten again when he got there, and he was interrogated. And during the course of the interrogation, he confessed to throwing stones at cars. Now, or throwing a stone at a car. Now, he has since said in his affidavit that he was threatened with more beatings if he didn't confess, which is completely consistent with reports that we see from Israeli media, from completely reputable human rights organizations. Ben Gvir himself, who oversees the prison system, boasts about torturing and starving prisoners. So he has been now in Israeli military detention. I think Sunday will be 9 months, and he is not doing so well from what we hear. I mean, the family has not been able to see him. The hearing has been delayed and delayed and delayed. They're desperate to get him out. I mean, I stayed with this family for about a week. They are, not that this should matter to anybody because every life is equally precious, but their family and the way they live has much more in common with my family and the way we live than it does with like a lot of what you might expect for Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza. I mean, they just remind me a lot of everyone that I know and grew up with in New York, and their kid's been kidnapped, and he's American, and they've been desperate to get American authorities to help release him. And a couple, there have been some Congress people who have, spoken out in their defense and signed letters and stuff. But the U.S. Embassy, the State Department, they've done virtually nothing to help release him, and so he's just in prison, and they don't know when he's going to get out.
It's so frightening.
Another thing that just happened, which it's another one of these like it shouldn't be shocking, but it still is. They just found out that the Israeli embassy in Washington circulated a letter on Capitol Hill that basically smeared Mohammed. Stated as fact that he had thrown stones at cars, mentioned the confession, of course, without mentioning, that he said he was beaten. Did not include the fact, it said he has regular routine medical checkups. It did not include the fact that even the prison medical system said that he had low BMI. In other words, he was starving. And they sent this letter around to try to erode support for Mohammed's case. So it's like, this is where the Israeli embassy, who you would think the Israeli embassy in Washington has like a lot on their plate, a lot of things they need to be managing. They are expending energy and political capital on keeping an American teenager imprisoned in military detention, which is just so revolting.
Well, Jasper, one thing I wanted to say about the impact of your reporting, not only in publicizing that settler attack that you filmed, but you are seeing now in Washington more lawmakers speak up, criticizing Israeli settler violence who didn't before. So you mentioned al-Kir, where Adwa Hathalim was killed. Recently there's a letter circulating from Jamie Raskin, and among the people to sign that letter was Congressmember Dan Goldman of New York, a staunch supporter of Israel. And again, it's a counterfactual, but I don't think we would get some of the people speaking out now about settler violence if not for the incident that you publicized. So you deserve a lot of credit for the reporting you did, and it did make a difference. And even though these are really small victories, compared to the genocide in Gaza, any kind of protection for besieged Palestinians in the West Bank is a victory. So I hope you can take some pride in that, and I hope you keep doing it. I hope we can see continued journalism from you documenting the reality of the occupation in the West Bank. How can people support your work?
First of all, thank you, Aaron. It means a lot coming from you. My work is, I have a Substack called Infinite Jazz, Jaz, and that is where my income comes from. I'm an independent reporter, so all my trips I pay for myself. I don't have security. I don't have a camera person. And a paid subscription on Substack is like $6 or $7 a month. So I really appreciate support there. I'm posting dispatches directly from the West Bank. I'm raising their voices, letting my friends and sources there speak on their own accord. And so you can support me there. And I'm also Infinite Jazz on Twitter and Instagram. And just last thing I want to mention is, to your point, Aaron, about like this story breaking through, and I think specifically the Dan Goldman thing. I know because I've been told by people who know that Goldman, his office was humiliated by all the times I accuse them of abandoning me there. And, he's got, which, Dan, if you're listening, I'm very sorry. But he's got primary challengers coming, potentially Brad Lander, from what I understand. And I think it's clear, like, this guy doesn't give a shit about Palestinians. He doesn't care about this community of Al Khair, but one thing will talk, and it's, voters. And if he feels the heat, then he might move a little bit. And so it is like, I think it's so easy to be hopeless these days about Palestine and Israel and the state of our relations there. But, people on the ground in the West Bank understand that there is a really seismic shift occurring, and that it has not resulted in a shift in public sentiment, and it has not resulted in nearly enough material change yet, obviously. But if we can just keep humiliating these AIPAC politicians one at a time, we might actually be able to make a difference.
We'll leave it there. Jasper Nathaniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks both for having me. Take care.
That was such a great interview. And, Jasper, I know, is very conscious of the fact that it's very messed up that when something happens to an American Jewish kid, there's a lot more attention paid than when something happens to a Palestinian. But I think it's really important that he uses that privilege to highlight these stories. I also wanted to mention that we talked about Mohammed Ibrahim, who is now 16 years old, Palestinian American, U.S. citizen, who has been detained since the age of 15. And I wanted to make sure that people could follow what's happening with him. His family is doing a lot of organizing, trying to get him released. So we'll put a link to his website in the description of the show.
All right. And that's our show. To get bonus content and keep the show going, go to usefulidiots.podcast.com. Stay tuned this weekend for Kitty's interview with Richard Wolff. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiots.podcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.